If you dance this waltz without embarrassing yourself, I'll give you $10 million. Those words echoed through the marble ballroom like a death sentence wrapped in silk. Carla stood at the edge of the grand hall, her maid's uniform a stark contrast to the glittering evening gowns and custom tuxedos that filled the East Coast mansion. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across faces she recognized from news broadcasts and federal investigations, senators who shouldn't be here, judges who'd buried cases for the right price, businessmen whose empires were built on blood and concrete. Antonio Moretti raised her champagne glass, her voice cutting through the chamber music with surgical precision. The Mafia boss's eyes locked onto Carla with the same casual cruelty a child might show an ant before pulling off its wings. "You've been staring at my orchestra all night, sweetheart." Antonio's smile was all teeth, no warmth. The room shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. Phone cameras subtly angled toward the spectacle about to unfold. "Let's make this interesting." Carla's fingers tightened around the empty serving tray in her hands, porcelain white against dark skin. She kept her eyes lowered, counting exit routes the way she'd been trained since childhood. 3 doors. 2 hallways. 1 kitchen service entrance behind the east wall. "Dance for us," Antonio continued, her Italian leather shoes clicking against marble as she approached. Each step was a countdown. 1 waltz. "If you don't trip over those cheap shoes and embarrass yourself in front of my guests, I'll wire you $10 million right now." Laughter erupted like breaking glass. A congressman slapped his knee. A federal prosecutor nearly choked on her martini. The head of the dockworkers union pulled out his phone, already composing the caption for social media, "Mafia Queen humiliates help." This was entertainment for them. Degradation a sport. The powerful reminding the powerless exactly where they stood in the food chain. Antonio leaned in close enough that Carla could smell her perfume, something French, something that cost more than most people's cars. "What's wrong? Lost your voice?" She snapped her fingers at the conductor. "Strauss. The Blue Danube. Let's see what this girl's made of." Carla's jaw clenched. The bruise on her ego would fade slower than any physical wound. But her eyes, just for a fraction of a second, flicked upward to the oil painting above the grand staircase. A portrait of Antonio in her younger years, holding a small girl with dark curls and careful posture. A girl who'd been erased from every family record 23 years ago. "I'll dance," Carla said quietly, her voice barely audible over the resumed mockery. Antonio blinked, surprised the mouse had found her squeak. "What was that?" Carla set down her serving tray with deliberate care. She straightened her spine. When she looked up this time, her eyes didn't lower. "I said I'll dance, Ms. Moretti. Have you ever watched someone walk into their own trap? If this story makes your heart race, show us some love with a like and share it with someone who believes in second chances and drop in the comment where you are watching from. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us hope and love." The orchestra began tuning. Antonio returned to her throne-like chair at the head of the room, supremely confident. She'd done this dance before, different faces, same script. Humiliate the help. Remind everyone who owned the air they breathed. The system always protected people like her. Money, power, and violence formed an unbreakable trinity. But as Carla stepped onto the polished dance floor, something shifted in her posture. Her shoulders rolled back with muscle memory older than the mansion itself. Her footwork changed, weight distributed differently, center of gravity lower, movements carrying a precision that didn't come from YouTube tutorials or weekend classes at the local community center. The first notes of the waltz began. And Carla didn't just dance. She moved like someone reclaiming stolen ground. Each step was a declaration. Each turn, a challenge. Her cheap uniform suddenly looked like a costume she'd chosen to wear, not one forced upon her. The laughter began dying in sections, like lights going out across a city during a blackout. From her seat, Antonio's smile started to falter. Something cold crept up her spine, a feeling she hadn't experienced since the night she'd ordered her own daughter hidden away during the bloodiest turf war the East Coast had ever seen. A feeling like watching ghosts learn to walk. Because Antonio recognized those steps. Not just the waltz. Not just the technique. But the variations, private choreography from a private academy that had burned down 15 years ago. Movements only taught to one child. Movements Antonio herself had designed to be a signature, a secret language between mother and daughter. Movements that died the night she erased that daughter from existence. Carla executed a pivot-and-pause combination that only existed in Antonio's memory. The exact same timing. The exact same grace note at the end. The room went silent except for the orchestra. Antonio's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against marble in a crystalline explosion that made half the room flinch. But Carla never broke rhythm. She simply held Antonio's gaze across the ballroom, steady, unflinching, patient, as the waltz continued to build toward its crescendo. And in that moment, Antonio understood. The maid she'd humiliated wasn't staff. The girl she'd mocked in front of judges and killers wasn't a stranger. And the past she'd buried in legal documents and offshore accounts was waltzing in a $15 uniform, proving her identity without speaking a single word. The $10 million no longer mattered. What mattered was that the ballroom was full of witnesses. And Antonio Moretti, the woman who'd built an empire on secrets, was about to have her most dangerous one dragged into the light by the daughter she'd tried to forget. But before that ballroom became a courtroom, before that waltz became a reckoning, Carla was just a girl who learned too early that the world was built to make her invisible. Carla learned the rules before she learned to read. Rule 1. Don't stand out. The first foster home was in Pennsylvania, a cramped row house in Pittsburgh where 3 other kids slept in bunk beds that smelled like mildew and someone else's nightmares. Mrs. Chen ran the house with the efficiency of a prison warden. Breakfast at 6. Lights out at 8. Questions were answered with silence or a wooden spoon against the kitchen counter. Carla was 5 years old when she asked about her mother. Mrs. Chen's face went blank as fresh paper. Your mother's gone. That's all you need to know. Gone. Not dead. Not missing. Just gone, like a word erased from a sentence. Rule 2. Don't ask questions. By age 7, Carla had moved to a group home outside Atlanta. Then a foster family in Baltimore. Then another group facility in Newark. Different cities, different faces, same message: keep your head down, your mouth shut, your expectations non-existent. The caseworkers changed every 6 months. None of them looked her in the eye. The paperwork always had sections blacked out with thick permanent marker, redactions that turned her life story into a classified document. When she asked why, the answer was always the same bureaucratic deflection: it's complicated. You're safer not knowing. Safer. That word followed her like a shadow with teeth. Rule 3. Don't get attached. The longest she stayed anywhere was 11 months, a foster family in Maryland with a kind woman named Patricia who baked cookies on Sundays and almost felt like home. Carla made the mistake of calling her Mom once, accidentally, reaching for a glass of water at dinner. Patricia's smile cracked like porcelain. "Oh, sweetheart. Don't do that." 2 weeks later, Carla was transferred to a facility in Virginia. No explanation. No goodbye. She stopped unpacking her suitcase after that. But there was one constant across every temporary home, every forgettable city, every place that refused to let her belong. The woman who taught her to dance. She appeared when Carla turned 8, always late at night, always unannounced. A tall, elegant figure with silver-streaked hair pulled tight into a bun and eyes that missed nothing. She never gave her name. The caseworkers never mentioned her. It was as if she existed in the margins of Carla's life, a footnote no one was allowed to read. Posture, the woman would command, snapping her fingers in the darkness of whatever basement or garage they'd commandeered for the evening. An old vinyl record player crackled to life. Strauss, Tchaikovsky, Chopin. Music that belonged in marble ballrooms, not cinderblock foster homes. Shoulders back. Chin up. You move like you're apologizing for existing. Stop it. Carla learned the waltz before she learned long division. Mastered the foxtrot before she understood fractions. The training was relentless, unforgiving, and completely unexplained. "Why am I learning this?" Carla asked once, her feet aching from 2 hours of repetition. The woman's expression turned to ice. "Because mistakes are not allowed." Again. Mistakes meant starting over. Mistakes meant 3 additional hours of practice. Mistakes meant the woman's disappointment, somehow worse than any caseworker's indifference. Carla never knew why she was being trained. Only that perfection was the price of survival. Then, just before her 16th birthday, the woman stopped coming. No explanation. No goodbye. Just another ghost in a life built from erasures. Present day. Antonio Moretti's mansion. Carla had been waiting tables here for 4 months, navigating the ecosystem of predators in expensive suits. She'd watched deals get made over dessert courses. Heard senators promise favors between sips of bourbon. Seen judges pocket envelopes thick with cash while discussing jurisprudence. The mansion operated on food chain logic, apex predators at the top, disposable prey at the bottom. Maids were furniture. Invisible until needed, irrelevant once used. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like confirmation. Because 3 months ago, sorting through estate sale records at a library in Queens, Carla had found a photograph tucked inside a damaged legal file. A society page from a 23-year-old newspaper. Antonio Moretti hosts charity gala. Pictured with daughter, Sophia. The girl in the photograph had Carla's eyes. Carla's nose. Carla's exact stance, shoulders back, chin up, apologizing for nothing. The caption identified the dance academy in the background, Moretti Private Studio, EST 1987. Carla had traced everything backward from that single photograph. Found the academy's burned records. Found the instructor's obituary, a woman with silver-streaked hair who died in a car accident with no witnesses. Found the legal documents declaring Sophia Moretti deceased in a fire that destroyed all DNA evidence. Found the lies that built her cage. So Carla had applied for the maid position under a fake name. Passed the background check because her real background didn't legally exist. And waited. Not for money. For answers. For proof that she wasn't crazy. That her life wasn't random cruelty. That someone had stolen her identity for a reason. And tonight, when Antonio Moretti made her cruel joke about $10 million, Carla saw her opening. The spotlight she'd been trained never to enter. The stage set for a reckoning 23 years in the making. As the orchestra played and the powerful laughed, Carla stepped onto the polished dance floor, not as a maid seeking mercy, but as a ghost demanding resurrection. And the woman who'd erased her was about to learn what happens when the disappeared decide to be seen. The orchestra's first note hung in the air like a held breath. Then Carla moved. The transformation was instant, so complete it seemed impossible that the same person stood on the ballroom floor. Her spine lengthened as if pulled by invisible thread. Her shoulders dropped and rolled back, settling into a frame that belonged in old photographs of Vanderbilt galas and Gilded Age society pages. Her chin lifted with the kind of quiet authority that couldn't be faked, couldn't be learned from watching videos or taking classes at the strip mall dance studio down on Fifth Avenue. This was breeding. Bloodline. Muscle memory written into bone. The laughter began to fade in patches. A congressman's chuckle died mid-breath. A real estate developer lowered his phone, the mocking video he'd been recording suddenly feeling less like entertainment. The federal prosecutor who'd nearly choked on her martini set down her glass with trembling fingers. Because what they were watching wasn't a maid trying to survive humiliation. It was a dancer reclaiming her inheritance. Carla's first step was a classical chassé, weight shifting from left to right with the precision of a metronome, her cheap work shoes somehow gliding across marble like silk on water. Her arms rose into frame position, and even without a partner, the placement was perfect. Elbows at exactly 90 degrees. Wrists soft but controlled. Hands positioned as if holding something infinitely precious and infinitely dangerous. The second measure brought a natural turn, her body rotating with centrifugal grace, head spotting the chandelier above to prevent dizziness. It was a technique that took most dancers years to master. Carla executed it like breathing. "Jesus," someone whispered from the back of the room. Antonio's champagne flute had stopped halfway to her lips. She sat frozen in her chair, a statue carved from expensive fabric and old sins. Her mind was racing, trying to reconcile the impossibility unfolding in front of her. This isn't possible. She's nobody. She came from an employment agency. Background check was clean. She's just. Carla performed a progressive sequence, 3 continuous waltz steps that built momentum like a stone rolling downhill. Her footwork was flawless. Ball heel, ball heel, ball heel. Each step placed with architectural precision, building the foundation for the next movement. The guards stationed at the exits had gone rigid. The kind of tension that came from recognizing a threat you couldn't identify. Their hands didn't move toward weapons, not yet, but their eyes tracked Carla's every movement with the focus of men who'd survived by reading danger in rooms like this. The whispers had stopped completely. Even the orchestra seemed surprised by what they were accompanying, their playing tightening in response to Carla's movements rather than leading them. She was controlling the tempo through sheer physical presence, her body dictating rhythm to musicians who'd performed for presidents and mob bosses alike. This was the language of old money, old power, old blood. Not the language of a girl who'd grown up in foster care across Pittsburgh, Atlanta, Baltimore, and Newark. Not the language of someone who'd learned life from caseworkers and government cheese and hand-me-down clothes that never quite fit. Carla executed a contracheck, a sharp reversal that required perfect balance and core strength most professional dancers spent years developing. She made it look effortless. Then she transitioned into a promenade sequence, her body opening toward the watching crowd with the confidence of someone who'd been born to be watched, trained to command space. The cultural dissonance was staggering. Here was a woman in a $15 maid's uniform with calluses on her hands from scrubbing floors and carrying serving trays, moving like she'd been raised in the same rarefied atmosphere as the people mocking her. Like she'd taken private lessons in Vienna. Like her childhood had been chamber music and deportment classes instead of group homes and survival tactics. Antonio's fingers tightened on her armrest, knuckles going white beneath her rings. Those steps. That technique. That's not. Carla moved through a reverse turn, her body spiraling with controlled power. But it was the small details that made Antonio's blood run cold. The way Carla's head tilted at the apex of the turn, exactly 15 degrees, no more, no less. The way her supporting leg maintained turnout through the entire rotation. The way she held the finishing position for precisely 1.5 counts before releasing into the next phrase. These weren't just waltz steps. These were specific waltz steps. Variations that didn't exist in any standard curriculum. Modifications Antonio herself had choreographed 2 decades ago in a private studio that no longer existed, teaching a daughter the world believed was dead. Teaching Sophia. The room had transformed into a museum, people frozen mid-gesture, mid-sip, mid-breath. Watching something they couldn't name but instinctively understood was significant. Dangerous. Wrong in ways that made their survival instincts scream warnings their conscious minds couldn't articulate. Carla wasn't borrowing space on the dance floor. She was taking it back. Every step was a reclamation. Every turn, a declaration of war. Every perfectly executed movement was proof of something buried, something hidden, something that powerful people had spent serious money making sure stayed dead. Then Carla performed a hover telemark, an advanced variation that required the dancer to suspend in a lunge position for 2 full counts, defying gravity through nothing but technique and controlled strength. It was a step Antonio had invented herself. A signature move she'd taught to exactly 1 student. A step she hadn't seen performed in 23 years. Antonio's hands gripped her armrests so hard the leather creaked, and for the first time in 30 years of controlling the deadliest criminal organization on the East Coast, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed: fear. Antonio's world had narrowed to a single point of focus. Everything else, the politicians nursing their whiskey, the judges pretending to be amused, the business partners recording what they thought would be viral humiliation, all of it became background noise. White static. Irrelevant. Because the woman dancing on her ballroom floor was executing choreography that should have died in a fire 23 years ago. The Moretti variation. That's what the instructors at the private academy had called it. A sequence Antonio had spent months perfecting, combining classical Viennese waltz with her own modifications, subtle changes in timing, unique arm placements, footwork patterns that existed nowhere in standard ballroom literature. She'd taught it to Sophia during those late-night sessions when the rest of the mansion slept. Mother and daughter alone in the studio, vinyl records crackling, moving through steps that were part training, part secret language, part legacy. One day, this will prove who you are, Antonio had whispered, guiding her daughter's small hands into position. No matter what happens, these steps will remember when the world forgets. She'd meant it as insurance. As protection. She'd never imagined it would come back as accusation. The memory hit Antonio like a fist to the sternum. Sofia at 6 years old, frustrated to tears because she couldn't hold the hover telemark long enough. "I can't do it, Mama. My leg shakes." Then we practice until it doesn't. Moretti women don't quit. We adapt. We endure. We win. The child's face, so serious, so determined. "Will I always be a Moretti, Mama? Even if something bad happens?" Antonio had knelt down, cupping that small face in her hands. "Always. Blood doesn't lie, baby. Blood remembers." 3 years later, when the Calabrese family declared war, when bullets started finding Antonio's associates in parking garages and restaurants, when the body count climbed and the feds started circling like sharks smelling blood in the water, Antonio had made the hardest decision of her life. She'd erased Sofia from existence. New identity. New life. New everything. Far away from the bloodshed, far from the empire, far from the target on Antonio's back. "I'm doing this to protect you," she'd told herself while signing the falsified death certificate. "You'll understand when you're older. This is love. This is sacrifice." The studio burned down 2 weeks later. The instructor died in a convenient car accident. Every record, every photograph, every piece of evidence that Sofia Moretti had ever existed, destroyed, buried, redacted into legal oblivion. Antonio had told herself she was being merciful. She was starting to realize she'd been a coward. Around her, the guests were beginning to understand that something had shifted. They didn't know what, couldn't articulate it, but the atmosphere in the ballroom had changed like air pressure dropping before a storm. Senator Morrison leaned toward his aide. "Who is that woman?" The aide, a Yale graduate who'd researched every person in Antonio's organization, could only whisper back, "The file said housekeeping staff. Background was clean. She's nobody." But nobody moved like this. On the dance floor, Carla transitioned into a natural weave, 6 steps that required the dancer to travel backward while maintaining forward momentum. It was counterintuitive, physically demanding, and executed so smoothly it looked like she was floating. Then came the variant Antonio had created herself. Instead of the standard head position, Carla's chin angled 45 degrees right during the second back step, then centered on the 4th step, creating a visual ripple effect that drew the eye and balanced the movement in a way traditional choreography didn't account for. No one knew that variation existed. No one except Antonio and the daughter she'd buried. The orchestra had stopped following their conductor entirely. The maestro's baton waved in increasingly frustrated gestures, trying to lead musicians who were now taking their cues from Carla's movements. She'd become the center of gravity in the room, the sun around which everything else orbited. When she needed the tempo faster, they accelerated. When she required a pause, they held. The power had transferred without a single word spoken, without a single command given. Antonio watched her guards exchange glances. Watched her lawyer's face go pale. Watched the federal prosecutor's hand tremble as she set down her glass. They felt it too. The shift. The wrongness. The return of something that should have stayed buried. Carla executed a spin turn with her arms in 3rd position, a modification that didn't exist in any textbook because Antonio had invented it specifically to accommodate a child's shorter frame, a teaching tool that was supposed to evolve as Sophia grew older. But Carla performed it at adult height with the same fundamental structure, proving she'd learned it young and carried it forward, muscle memory preserved like DNA evidence. She knows, Antonio realized, ice flooding her veins. She knows who she is. She knows what I did. And she's not here for money. The waltz was building toward its crescendo. Carla's movements became larger, more powerful, claiming space with the authority of someone who'd been denied it for 2 decades and was now collecting with interest. The room felt smaller suddenly. The crystal chandeliers too bright. The watching faces too many. Antonio stood abruptly, her chair scraping against marble loud enough to echo. Every head turned toward her. But Carla kept dancing, kept moving through steps that shouldn't exist, through choreography that had supposedly burned along with every other inconvenient truth Antonio had tried to destroy. Antonio raised her hand, a single gesture that had ended careers, silenced witnesses, and commanded absolute obedience for 30 years. "Stop the music," she said, her voice cutting through Strauss like a blade through silk. "Stop it now." The orchestra died mid-measure. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was the kind of quiet that came after explosions, after car crashes, after the moment when everyone realized something terrible and irreversible had just occurred. Carla stood in the center of the ballroom, chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, arms still held in frame position. She didn't lower them. Didn't apologize. Didn't shrink back into the invisible maid she'd been 20 minutes ago. She simply waited. Antonio descended from her raised seating area with the slow, deliberate movements of a predator approaching prey. Each step echoed against marble. Her Valentino gown whispered against the floor like secrets trying to escape. The guests parted without being asked, creating a path that felt more like a procession toward execution than a walk across a dance floor. When Antonio reached Carla, she stopped exactly 3 feet away, close enough to speak privately, far enough to maintain the illusion of control. Up close, Antonio could see details she'd missed before. The exact shade of brown in Carla's eyes, not common dark brown, but the specific amber-flecked variation that ran in the Moretti bloodline. The shape of her jaw. The way her left eyebrow sat slightly higher than her right when her face was neutral. No coincidence. Plenty of people have. But Antonio's hands were shaking, and Antonio Moretti's hands never shook. The question came out rougher than intended, stripped of the elegant menace she usually wielded like a weapon. "Who taught you that?" For words that carried the weight of 2 decades. Carla held her gaze. Steady. Unflinching. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but it carried to every corner of the silent ballroom. "My mother." Before she disappeared. The simplicity of it was devastating. Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Not everyone understood, the younger guests, the politicians who'd only known Antonio's public face, they looked confused. But the old guard, the ones who'd been with the family since the beginning, who remembered the war with the Calabrese family and the rumors that followed, their faces went pale. Senator Morrison's whiskey glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against marble. He didn't even notice. Antonio's lawyer, Michael Chen, a man who'd built a career on maintaining composure through federal raids and grand jury testimonies, took an involuntary step backward, his Armani shoes squeaking against polished stone. Cristo, someone whispered in Italian from the back of the room. Antonio felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been holding together through sheer force of will for 23 years. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. What was your mother's name? Carla's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Pain, maybe. Or vindication. I don't know. The records were sealed. Redacted. Every caseworker I asked told me it was classified. For my own protection. She paused, letting the words settle like sediment in still water. But she taught me to dance. Late at night. Old vinyl records. Strauss. Tchaikovsky. She said mistakes weren't allowed. She said. Carla's voice caught, just barely. She said I needed to be perfect because someday these steps would prove who I was when everything else was taken away. The ballroom tilted. Antonio grabbed the edge of a nearby chair to steady herself, a gesture so uncharacteristic that her head of security actually reached for his weapon, thinking she was having a heart attack. I said those exact words. Verbatim. To Sophia. In the studio. No one else was there. No one else could know. What else did she teach you? Antonio's voice came out as a whisper. Carla reached up slowly, carefully, and pulled a thin silver chain from beneath her uniform collar. Dangling from it was a St. Christopher medal, tarnished, old, the engraving worn almost smooth by time and touch. But Antonio could still read the inscription on the back because she'd had it engraved herself. Per mia figlia. Semper protetta. Am. For my daughter. Always protected. Antonio had placed it around Sophia's neck the night she sent her away. The night she'd promised it was temporary. The night she'd lied and called it love. The room was spinning now. Faces blurred. Sound became distant and muffled, like she was underwater. Where did you get that? The question came out broken, desperate. It was in my belongings when I was found. Age 5. Abandoned at a hospital in Pittsburgh with no identification. No records. No family. Carla's voice remained steady, clinical, reciting facts like evidence in a trial. Just this medal and a note that said, keep her safe. Keep her hidden. She's all I have left. The federal prosecutor was on her phone, undoubtedly recording every word. The congressman had gone completely white, realizing he was witnessing something that could end careers, or lives. The business partners who'd been laughing 10 minutes ago now looked like they wanted to dissolve into the marble beneath their feet. Antonio's mind raced through possibilities, explanations, anything that could make this make sense without making it true. Stolen. Could be stolen. Could be a con. Could be. What's your birthday? Antonio asked suddenly. March 7th. Sophia's birthday. What hospital? UPMC Children's. Pittsburgh. The hospital Antonio had used. The one with the doctors who asked no questions when paid enough. The woman who trained you. Describe her. Tall. Silver hair in a bun. Scar on her left hand between thumb and index finger. She never smiled. Never gave her name. She smelled like lavender and motor oil. Carlotta. The instructor from the academy. Antonio's most trusted associate. The woman who'd helped orchestrate the erasure. Who'd promised to watch over Sophia from a distance. Who'd died in a car accident. Or who'd been eliminated when she got too close, when she started training the child to remember instead of forget. Antonio stared at the woman in front of her, This impossible ghost wearing a maid's uniform and carrying proof written in movement, in memory, in blood. And for the first time in 3 decades of ruling an empire built on secrets, Antonio Moretti realized she was looking at the one truth she couldn't bury, couldn't threaten, couldn't make disappear. Her daughter had come home. Antonio's voice cut through the silence like a judge's gavel. Lock the doors. Her head of security, Vincent, didn't hesitate. He moved with military precision, nodding to the guards stationed at each exit. Heavy oak doors swung shut with sounds like coffin lids closing. Electronic locks engaged with mechanical clicks that echoed through the ballroom. Senator Morrison turned toward the nearest exit, instinct overriding politics. Now wait just a... Sit down, Senator. Antonio didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. No one leaves until this is finished. The congressman who'd been laughing earlier tried his phone. No signal. The mansion's security system included signal jammers for exactly this kind of situation, though Antonio had never imagined using them like this. They were witnesses now, not guests. And witnesses in Antonio Moretti's world didn't leave until she decided what truth they'd be allowed to carry with them. Antonio circled Carla slowly, the way prosecutors circled defendants during cross-examination. But her movements lacked their usual predatory grace. Something in her had fractured, and everyone could see the cracks spreading. "You came here for this," Antonio said, her voice controlled but fragile. "The job. The months of serving drinks and cleaning floors. All of it was set up." "Yes." Carla didn't apologize. Didn't justify. The dance wasn't about the money. No. Then what was it about? Antonio stopped directly in front of her, close enough that the height difference became obvious. Carla was taller by 2 inches. When had that happened? When had the child she remembered grown into this? Carla met her eyes with a steadiness that made Antonio want to look away. "Proof," Carla said simply. "I've spent 23 years being told I was nobody. That my memories were fantasies. That the woman in my dreams who taught me to dance never existed." Her voice remained calm, factual, devastating in its restraint. Every caseworker, every therapist, every foster parent, they all said the same thing: let it go. Move forward. Stop looking backward. She gestured at the frozen orchestra, the trapped guests, the ballroom that had transformed from theater to tribunal. But I couldn't. Because the steps were real. The training was real. And if that was real, then everything else, the mother I barely remember, the life I was told never existed, the feeling that I belonged somewhere before I belonged nowhere, all of it had to be real too. Antonio's jaw tightened. "So you waltzed your way into an accusation." "I waltzed my way into evidence." Carla's correction was sharp as a scalpel. "Every step I performed was choreography that exists nowhere in public record. Variations you created. Movements you taught to one person. If I'm just some con artist, some opportunist with a stolen medal, explain how I know steps that only existed between you and the daughter you erased." The guests were watching like jurors now. The lawyer had his phone out, recording everything despite the jammer. The federal prosecutor's face showed the expression of someone realizing they were witnessing something that would end up in case files and congressional hearings. Judge Castellano, a corrupt magistrate who'd spent 15 years in Antonio's pocket, leaned forward in his chair. Even he recognized the legal architecture of what was happening. This wasn't just a family confrontation. This was testimony. Antonio felt the walls closing in, not the physical walls of her mansion, but the walls she'd built around the past. 23 years of careful construction crumbling because a ghost learned to dance. What do you want? The question came out harder than intended. Money? Status? Revenge? What's the endgame here, Carla, if that's even your real name? It's not. Carla's voice carried to every corner of the silent ballroom. My real name was taken from me when I was 5 years old and left at a hospital with a note and a medal. The caseworkers gave me Carla Thompson because they needed to call me something on the paperwork. She took a step forward. Antonio, for the first time anyone could remember, took a step back. I don't want your empire. I don't want your blood money or your criminal legacy. I want the one thing you can't fake, can't buy, and can't threaten into submission. Carla's voice was quiet, but it filled the room like thunder. I want you to tell the truth. Here. Now. In front of all these people who've spent years watching you bury secrets and rewrite history. The ballroom had become a courtroom. The guests, the jury. The dance floor, the witness stand. And Antonio, the woman who'd bought judges and intimidated prosecutors for 3 decades, was finally being forced into the defendant's chair. Tell them, Carla said. Tell them who I am. Antonio's hands trembled at her sides. Her empire was built on control, of information, of people, of narratives. She'd survived gang wars and federal investigations by never giving an inch, never showing weakness, never admitting anything that could be used against her. But standing in front of her was living proof that some truths couldn't be buried deep enough. The metal around Carla's neck caught the chandelier light. The same light that had shone on Sofia 23 years ago when Antonio had fastened that chain and promised, lied, that she'd come back for her. Michael Chen, her lawyer, was shaking his head slightly, a warning. Don't admit anything. Don't confirm. Don't give them ammunition. But the room was full of people who'd already seen enough. Who'd already heard enough. Who'd already witnessed a maid-perform choreography that shouldn't exist and survive cross-examination with the poise of someone trained for exactly this moment. Antonio looked at the faces watching her. Senators. Judges. Business partners. People who'd profited from her secrets and feared her ruthlessness. Now they were watching her decide whether to double down on the lie or confess to the one crime that couldn't be justified by empire building or self-preservation. The crime of erasing her own child. Antonio opened her mouth, and every person in the ballroom leaned forward, knowing that whatever came next would either cement her legend or destroy it completely. Antonio's voice, when it finally came, carried the weight of 3 decades collapsing into a single moment. This woman is not a maid. The words hung in the chandelier light like smoke from a fired gun. Senator Morrison's face went slack. The federal prosecutor's hand froze halfway to her mouth. Judge Castellano, who'd presided over countless Moretti-adjacent cases with carefully practiced blindness, suddenly looked like he was witnessing something that would require actual jurisprudence. Antonio turned slowly, addressing the room with the same command she'd used to broker million-dollar deals and order executions, but now the authority in her voice was fractured by something raw. Regret, maybe. Or recognition. Her name, Antonio's throat constricted. She swallowed hard, forcing the words past 2 decades of carefully constructed denial. Her name is Sofia Moretti. And she's my daughter. The shockwave was seismic. Michael Chen dropped his phone. The congressman made a sound like he'd been punched. 3 of Antonio's business partners immediately started calculating how this changed power. Structures, succession plans, territorial agreements that had been negotiated under the assumption that Antonio's line ended with her. Vincent, the head of security who'd served Antonio for 15 years, stared at Carla, at Sophia, with an expression caught between recognition and disbelief. He'd been there during the Calabrese War. He'd been at the funeral for the child who supposedly died in the fire. He'd helped carry an empty casket. Antonio continued, her voice gaining strength even as her facade crumbled. In 1999, the Calabrese family declared war on this organization. They weren't interested in negotiation or territory. They wanted extermination. They bombed restaurants during family dinners, shot up schools where our children studied, killed wives in grocery store parking lots. She looked directly at Carla, at Sophia, and for the first time, let the mask slip completely. I had a choice to make. Keep you close and watch you die like the others, or make you disappear so thoroughly that no one, not the Calabrese, not the feds, not even our own people, could find you. Use you. Kill you. Carla's expression didn't change. She listened like a judge hearing closing arguments. So I erased you, Antonio said, the confession scraping out like glass over concrete. New identity. Falsified death certificate. Destroyed every record. Paid off everyone who knew. I put you somewhere the war couldn't reach, and I told myself it was temporary. That when things calmed down, when the bodies stopped piling up, I'd bring you back. Her voice cracked. But they never stopped. The war became peace, peace became new business became new enemies. And every time I thought about bringing you home, I realized that this world, my world, was exactly what I'd saved you from. That the greatest gift I could give you was to let you stay disappeared. The ballroom was silent except for the sound of Antonio's breathing, each inhale an admission of guilt, each exhale a release of secrets held too long. I didn't abandon you because I didn't love you, Antonio said quietly. I abandoned you because I did. Carla stood motionless in her maid's uniform, the contrast between her clothing and her revealed identity almost absurd now. After a long moment, she spoke. You made that choice for both of us. Without asking. Without warning. Her voice remained steady, absent of the rage everyone expected. You decided I was safer as nobody than as your daughter. But what you saved me from, you replaced with something else. Foster care. Group homes. Caseworkers who looked at me like I was inventory. 23 years of not belonging anywhere because the one place I belonged had decided I was better off erased. Antonio flinched like she'd been struck. Carla continued, her words precise as the choreography she'd performed. I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here to destroy your empire or expose your crimes. I came here to prove I existed. To prove I wasn't crazy. To prove that the memories and the training and the feeling that I was someone before I became no one, all of it was real. She gestured at the ballroom, the trapped witnesses, the fallen spectacle. And I proved it. The dance did what you promised it would. It showed everyone who I am when everything else was taken away. Antonio straightened, some of her command returning despite the emotional devastation. Then let me give back what I took. She turned to her lawyer. Michael. Transfer papers for the Riverside estate. Full access to the offshore accounts in the Cayman Trust. Corporate shares. I don't want your properties. Carla's interruption was calm but absolute. Then name your price. Anything. You already did. Carla pointed at the ballroom floor where she'd danced, where the bet had been made, where humiliation had transformed into resurrection. $10 million. You said if I danced without embarrassing myself, you'd wire it tonight. Antonio blinked, thrown by the simplicity. I was mocking you. I know. But I earned it anyway. Carla's expression was unreadable. Not as a prize. Not as charity. As restitution. 23 years of foster care, of being told I was nobody, of surviving in a system designed to erase girls like me. I figure that's worth about $10 million in damages. The reframing was brutal. Antonio had offered the money as humiliation. Carla was claiming it as compensation. Done. Antonio's voice was immediate. But that's nothing. Sophia, you're my heir. The organization, the legitimate businesses, I don't want your empire. The refusal hung in the air like a verdict. Antonio stared at her daughter, this woman she'd tried to save by destroying, and realized she was watching someone who'd inherited her strength but rejected her methods. Who'd survived everything Antonio had put her through and emerged with the one thing Antonio had sacrificed decades ago. Integrity. Then what do you want? Antonio asked, genuinely confused for the first time in her adult life. Carla looked around the ballroom at the senators, the judges, the criminals in expensive suits who'd laughed at her 20 minutes ago and were now calculating how to profit from her existence. I want to walk out of here on my own terms, she said quietly. With the money you owe me, the truth you finally told, and the proof that I'm not the ghost you tried to make me. After that, what I do with the name Moretti is my choice. Not yours. The wire transfer took 7 minutes. Michael Chen worked his phone with trembling fingers, routing $10 million through 3 different accounts before landing it in the new account Carla provided, a simple checking account at a credit union in Queens, the kind of place that didn't cater to people who owned senators or buried secrets in concrete. The contrast was almost offensive to the room of people who measured wealth in offshore havens and shell corporations. When the confirmation came through, Carla checked her own phone, a 3-year-old model with a cracked screen protector, and nodded once. Received, she said simply. Antonio stood 5 feet away, arms at her sides, looking more powerless than she had during federal raids or territorial negotiations. Because this was a transaction she couldn't manipulate, couldn't control, couldn't bend to her advantage. Her daughter was walking away. Sophia, the name caught in Antonio's throat, unused for so long it felt foreign. Stay. Please. You don't have to be part of the business, but you could. We could. We could what? Carla's question wasn't cruel, just honest. Pretend the last 23 years didn't happen? Have Sunday dinners and talk about the weather while you run an empire built on the same violence that made you erase me in the first place? She shook her head slowly. I didn't come here to join your world. I came here to prove I existed outside of it. Carla moved toward the door, her cheap work shoes clicking against marble with the same authority her dance steps had carried. Vincent, the head of security, looked to Antonio for instruction, stop her, detain her, do something. Antonio raised a hand. Let her go. The words cost her visibly. Vincent unlocked the doors. The electronic click sounded like a cell opening, though no one was sure whether it was Carla being released or everyone else being set free. At the threshold, Carla paused. She reached behind her neck and unclasped the silver chain, the St. Christopher medal catching light one final time. For a moment, it looked like she might take it with her, evidence, proof, connection. Instead, she turned back and walked to Antonio, holding out the tarnished medal. "This was supposed to keep me safe," Carla said quietly. "But safety isn't the same as love. And protection isn't the same as presence." Antonio took the medal with shaking hands, the medal still warm from Carla's skin. "I don't need it anymore," Carla continued. "I know who I am now. With or without your name. With or without your empire. With or without you." She stepped back, creating distance that felt permanent. "If you actually want to protect people, stop building cages and calling them shelter. Stop making choices for everyone else and calling it love. Stop erasing the things you're afraid to face." Carla glanced at the frozen guests, the politicians, the judges, the criminals who'd witnessed everything. "All of you. You spent tonight watching someone you thought was nobody prove she was somebody. Maybe that should tell you something about who you've been stepping on while climbing your ladders." Then she walked out. No dramatic exit. No slammed doors. No final confrontation. Just a woman in a maid's uniform leaving a mansion that had never been her home, carrying $10 million in restitution and the quiet dignity of someone who'd survived being erased and refused to stay a ghost. Antonio didn't follow. She stood in the center of her ballroom, surrounded by witnesses to her greatest failure, holding a medal that represented every good intention that had paved her road to this moment. The guests began to stir, whispers spreading like infection. Senator Morrison was already calculating political distance. Judge Castellano was mentally reviewing which cases might need reconsideration now that Antonio's heir had publicly rejected the empire. The business partners were reassessing succession plans, power vacuums, opportunities. But Michael Chen, who'd served Antonio for 20 years, saw something no one else did. His boss, the woman who'd stared down federal prosecutors and rival crime families without blinking, had tears on her face. Silent. Steady. Unstoppable. "Boss?" Vincent approached carefully. "Orders." Antonio closed her fist around the medal, feeling the engraving press into her palm. Per mia figlia. Semper protetta. She'd kept that promise. She'd protected Sophia. She just hadn't realized that sometimes the greatest threat to someone you love is your decision to love them from a distance so great they forget you existed. "Send everyone home," Antonio said, her voice distant. "The party's over." As the guests filed out, some quickly, some reluctantly, all of them carrying a story they'd dine out on for years, Antonio walked to the windows overlooking the circular driveway. She watched Carla walk down the marble steps, past the fountain, through the iron gates. No car waiting. No security detail. No entourage. Just a woman walking into the night alone, which was somehow more powerful than any exit Antonio had ever orchestrated. Michael stood beside his boss, uncertain what comfort looked like for a woman who'd built her life on being uncomforted. "She might come back," he offered quietly. "When she's had time to process." "No." Antonio's voice was certain. "She won't. And she shouldn't." She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching until Carla disappeared into the New York night, swallowed by a world that had tried to erase her and failed. "I spent 23 years telling myself I saved her," Antonio whispered. "Turns out she saved herself. From me." The ballroom behind them was empty now except for the orchestra packing up their instruments and the staff quietly collecting abandoned champagne glasses. The waltz was over. The trial was complete. And for the first time in 30 years, Antonio Moretti stood in her mansion, surrounded by everything she'd built, everything she'd won, everything she'd sacrificed for, and felt the crushing weight of exactly what all that power had cost her. 3 months after the waltz, the whispers started spreading through the underworld like rumors of a coming winter. Antonio Moretti has changed. At first, no one believed it. Leopards didn't change their spots. Crime bosses didn't suddenly develop consciences. Power didn't apologize for being powerful. But the evidence kept accumulating. A construction union leader who'd been skimming funds expected the usual response: a midnight visit, a broken hand, a very clear message about consequences. Instead, he received a phone call. A conversation. A renegotiated agreement that didn't involve intimidation or violence. He walked away confused and still employed. A restaurant owner who'd fallen behind on protection payments braced for retaliation. What he got was a restructured payment plan and a business loan at reasonable interest rates. "I don't understand," he told Vincent, Antonio's head of security. "Where's the catch?" Vincent had shrugged, equally baffled. "Boss says things are changing. Says we're done bleeding people dry just because we can." The old guard didn't know what to make of it. Judge Castellano noticed it in court. Antonio's lawyers were still aggressive, still brilliant, but the cases they took on had shifted. Fewer shakedowns. More legitimate disputes. Almost like the organization was trying to wash the blood off its hands without getting caught. Senator Morrison saw it in their private meetings. Antonio still commanded rooms, still made deals, still operated with the precision of someone who understood power's mechanics. But the cruelty had dulled. The public humiliations she'd once deployed like chess moves had stopped completely. "What happened to you?" he'd asked during a fundraiser, genuinely curious. Antonio had looked at him with eyes that seemed older, wearier. "I remembered what matters. Before I forget completely." She never explained further. Michaelchen understood better than most. He'd watched his boss spend late nights staring at a tarnished St. Christopher medal, turning it over in her hands like a rosary. He'd seen her redirect funds, quietly, anonymously, into foster care reform initiatives, group home improvements, scholarship programs for kids aging out of the system. All of it untraceable back to her. "You're building a legacy," he'd observed one night, reviewing the paperwork. "I'm paying a debt," Antonio had corrected. "There's a difference." The underworld adapted because the underworld always adapted. Some saw opportunity in Antonio's softening. Others saw strategy. A few saw what it actually was, a woman trying to figure out how to live with consequences she'd spent decades outrunning. But none of them saw what happened in Antonio's private study late at night, when she was alone with her guilt and a photograph she'd kept hidden for 23 years. Sophia at 4 years old, mid-spin in the dance studio, laughing at something Antonio had said. The last photo taken before everything changed. 1,500 miles away, in a modest apartment in Portland, Oregon, Carla unpacked groceries with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd learned early that resources were finite and waste was luxury she couldn't afford. The apartment wasn't much: 1 bedroom, decent light, a kitchen that actually had counter space. But it was hers. Truly, completely, legally hers. No foster parents who could decide she didn't fit. No group home supervisors who could transfer her for budget reasons. No caseworkers with the power to erase her life with a signature. Just Carla Thompson. She'd kept the name, decided it had earned its place after 23 years, living a life that was aggressively, beautifully normal. She worked at a nonprofit that helped kids transitioning out of foster care. The irony wasn't lost on her, but the work mattered. She understood their fear, their distrust, their bone-deep certainty that every good thing was temporary. She taught them differently. On Thursdays, she volunteered at a community center, teaching dance to kids who couldn't afford the fancy studios with their marble floors and crystal chandeliers. When she taught them the waltz, she never explained why precision mattered, why posture was power, why learning to move with grace was learning to move through a world that wanted to make them small. She just showed them the steps and let them discover their own reasons. One student, a 15-year-old named Maya who'd bounced through 7 foster homes, asked her once, "Why do you care so much about getting this right?" Carla had paused, considering the truth versus what would be helpful. "Because someday you might need to walk into a room that doesn't want you there and prove you belong anyway," she'd said finally. "And when that moment comes, you'll want to know how to stand." Maya had nodded like she understood completely. Some lessons transcended words. At night, when sleep came hard, Carla sometimes thought about the ballroom. The chandelier light. The moment when laughter died and recognition bloomed. The look on Antonio's face when the past stopped being theoretical and became flesh and blood standing 3 feet away. She didn't regret walking away. But she wondered sometimes what Antonio did with the truth now that it had been spoken aloud, witnessed, verified by senators and criminals alike. She wondered if change was actually possible for people who'd built empires on violence. She wondered if blood really was thicker than all the years that tried to thin it. Mostly, though, she wondered if the daughter Antonio had tried to save by erasing had finally taught the mother something about the difference between protection and presence. The answer came 4 months after the waltz, in an unmarked envelope with no return address. Inside was a certified check for $2 million and a note in handwriting Carla didn't recognize but somehow knew anyway. "For the studio you'll build someday. For the children who need to learn they're not invisible. For the future I stole and can't give back, only fund forward. I'm trying to be different. I don't know if it's enough. But you made me remember that some debts can't be paid, only acknowledged. A.M." Carla held the check for a long time, feeling its weight, understanding its meaning. This wasn't reconciliation. This was restitution. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most honest form of love Antonio Moretti had ever offered. Years later, when people told the story, and they always told the story, they focused on the spectacle. The maid who humiliated a mafia boss. The dance that exposed a dynasty's secrets. The $10 million bet that became a reckoning. But they missed the real lesson. They missed the quiet truth that unfolded after the chandelier lights dimmed and the witnesses went home. That power isn't just about who controls the room. It's about who survives the room when everyone else has decided you shouldn't exist. It's about the girl who learned to be invisible teaching herself to be seen. Because the most dangerous people in the world aren't the ones who command from thrones or rule from shadows, they're the ones who learned to survive unseen, who mastered silence, who carried proof in their bones, and who chose the exact right moment to step into the light and waltz. Thanks for watching till the very end. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be dropping another unforgettable story tomorrow, so make sure you don't miss it.